Shalom to Ruben Margules, president of ZOA's Brooklyn region.
Shalom, Yoni.
Ruben, during these days of Independence Day, Memorial Day, very important and significant days here in Israel, I wanted to ask you how American Jews feel during these days regarding the connection to Israel.
I believe very much like the Israeli. It's the commemoration of those who died is a bit depressing, but yet it's a very thankful time. I mean, that there are people with that kind of courage who are willing to sacrifice their lives for the ideal of a Jewish state. And of course, when Yom Ha'atzmaut takes over, it's an exhilarating time, and it's a very positive time for Jews all over the world, in the United States and Jews everywhere.
Now tell me, where would you say that we're holding in terms of Israel-US relations? It seems that those relations went through tough days, especially in the beginning of the Obama administration.
I'm not sure if those tough times from the beginning are still not with us. I believe he may have downpedaled or been much more soft-spoken over the past 2 years. But reflecting what Israel policy has become, it shows that there is tremendous pressure to stop the growth of Jewish communities in Yehuda and Shomron, and that's due to the executive branch of government. I might add that the Congress is very, very supportive, overwhelmingly supportive of Israel's position, and that's something that should be noted.
Do you think that the war on terror, especially after the Osama bin Laden assassination, brings the countries closer together?
I would hope so, but the countries are close to one another and continue to be, which is one of the beautiful things. Despite all the negative press that Israel has received, they are still perceived overwhelmingly as the victim in this conflict, even after 60 years. And so the war on terror reflects America's battles, but America's battles are similar to those of Israel, where it's Western values that are being attacked. Not simply a war of territory, but also a war of values.
You know, after the operation in Pakistan, there were many voices, of course, supporting, strengthening the U.S., also, of course, from Israel. But there was also a feeling that when Israel attacks terrorists, assassinates the leaders of terror organizations, we hear condemnations even from the U.S. How do you think the U.S. will respond next time Israel attacks a terror organization, a terrorist?
I think in the United States, you never had as big a problem as you have with the EU, with the European Union. I think the United States has given Israel a lot of leeway, if that's the word to use, in protecting its own borders and protecting its own country. And when that involved occasionally, the elimination of the heads of these terrorist organizations, I don't think the United States was that quick to condemn. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But then again, you have to remember that the United States has its own policy and Israel has its own policy. And when Israel starts kowtowing to American policy, that's when Israel gets into trouble. Israel, when it follows what it needs to follow, when it does what it has to do, without an overwhelming regard to the position of the United States or other countries, then it's successful. But when it starts changing, when it starts doing things that are really negative and hurts the country itself and its ability to defend itself, that's when Israel becomes weak. And that's when further demands are made. It's not just for that particular operation or for that particular incident, but further demands are made. And it's a never-ending spiral, a slippery slope that goes down. Okay? Israel has to do what it has to do, and it can't be subject to the dictates of either the United Nations, the EU, or the United States. We have our own issues, we have our own foreign relations, and Israel has to have its. And the Israeli foreign relations is much more, how would you say, it involves life or death decisions. The United States, thank God, is a big enough country, it can absorb a lot. Israel has lost over 22,000 soldiers since the War of Independence. Okay, 22,000 soldiers since 1950, I believe. That doesn't include even the War of Independence. In terms of the United States, that would be close to approximately what? Maybe 600,000 people.
Now, when you engage other Americans regarding Israel topics, what do you feel is the main issue fueling anti-Israel sentiment?
I think the main issue is a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding where Israel really is. The constant barrage of negative press that Israel receives, and the lack of a historical context in which to judge what Israel does. Okay? People think of Israel as the Goliath. And yet, this is one of a huge PR coup. Why? Because Israel is still faced with the hostility of 100 million Arabs. There's only 6 million Jews still, 100 million Arabs. They've created a conflict where it's only Israel against some sort of Palestinian authority or Palestinian people. But that Palestinian people is only the front. Look at what's going on now with these revolutions. Look at what's going on with Egypt. Look at what's going on with Syria, with Jordan. Is this going to be beneficial to Israel? And Israel is supposed to make further concessions within that context? But the vast majority of Americans, even American Jews, believe that Israel uses disproportionate force, that Israel is the Goliath in the combat, that Israel is occupying Palestinian territory when there never was a Palestinian territory. There was never any state called Palestine. In the years even that Egypt and Jordan controlled these territories, okay? There was never a Palestinian state, and they were never called occupiers. It only became an occupied state after 1967. And so we have to look in the context, we have to give some historical background to people, and they'll better understand. And of course, everybody wants peace. And Jews, of course, are universalists when it comes to peace. But there has to be a peace partner as well. And so far, there has not been any indication that the Arabs are forthcoming. They still want, what do they want now? They want now that all the Arab refugees of 47, supposed Arab refugees of 47, to come back within the borders of Israel. Is that realistic in any change, or represents any change? When you had Olmert that offered 97% of the territory, 97% of Yehud and Shomron, it was refused. To the extent that Israel can, it does. There is no country that wants peace more. But, on the other hand, when you consider these Arab states were formed at approximately the same time that the British mandate was given to the Balfour Declaration, and the British mandate was given to Britain to create a home for the Jews, none of the Arab states are being challenged in their borders. None of them. There's only one country, the smallest of them all, and that's Israel. And somehow the historical context and the truth of the struggle will come to the fore.
Now, Reuben, you were here in Israel for a special Purim activity for the IDF. Tell us about that.
Oh, yes. It was a wonderful, wonderful activity. It was our 11th year that we came to give Mashalach Manot to Israeli soldiers. These are Mashalach Manot that are bought in Israel, put together in Israel, and then we distribute them to the various bases through Sarel and a couple of other organizations. And this year, we distributed over 4,000 Mashalach Manot to bases all around Israel, mostly to fighting units. And also we gave what are these kind of water backpacks, which have become very popular and important to the soldiers. Allows them to drink and keep hydrated without using their hands, taking away their guns from their weapons. And so we also supplied that to a number of units. We were around Gaza, Kisufim Crossing. We went into some of these bases at the time when they had that heavy missile attack, if you remember. And over 50 Katyusha rockets and mortars were launched in one day. And we saw the quick response of all of these Giborim, of all these heroic soldiers, that in 1 minute we're dancing with the Mashalach Manat. They hear the noise from the speakers, the signal, whatever it was, and within seconds they all disappeared, scramble onto their tanks and go to the borders and do whatever they had to do. It's wonderful. It was a wonderful experience to see the pleasure that these soldiers got from knowing that people in the United States care about them. And included with each package was a separate letter to a chayal written by a student or a supporter here in the States. And we gave that to them as well with each package. And while we came to thank them, they couldn't thank us enough.
Met with many officials. What was the purpose of those meetings?
Well, the purpose of the meetings basically was to say hello again, to become reacquainted, and to say we're there, and we're there for them. My message also was the fact that there is a tremendous amount of support for Israel in the halls of Congress, and that should be exploited by the Knesset. Okay, in sort of, we have a government that's a system of checks and balances. Well, when you think that Obama is the only one that makes policy, you have to understand that there's another branch of government, the Congress, okay, which includes the Senate, that also has a certain say in policy making when it comes to foreign affairs. And there, Israel, I think, has a tremendous strength. And by the way, ZOA is holding its annual trip to Washington, D.C. next week, at which we'll be meeting with at least 3 or 4 dozen of these senators and congressmen. They'll be coming to speak to us. And whenever I hear them talk, I just say, Halavai, the members of Knesset, should talk like this. Okay? It's so uplifting.
Purim is the peak of your activity. Tell us, please, about other activities, other initiatives that you take part in.
Well, I'm also involved with Teret Kohanim, Jerusalem Reclamation Project, in which we're trying to educate people to the importance of a united Yerushalayim, and not to give up, and to make a Jewish presence in all parts of Yerushalayim a reality. And we've been, thank God, very successful. Mati Dan and Shani Heikind is our executive director here in New York, and I've been involved with that for many years. I've also been involved in a social area. We've been involved with Amuna in Baka. Amuna organization has a college in Baka, and we've been substantial contributors to the Holocaust Memorial Center over there, Amuna Holocaust Memorial Center. Both my parents are survivors of the Shoah, as were my wives, and I was born I'm a second generation, and I was born in Germany right after the war. The first surviving. The first rebirth of the Jewish people in Bamberg, Germany. Okay, so and I always feel that may be one of the reasons why I feel such a strong attachment. My father always told me that if he could have gone to Israel, he would have gone to Israel, but he wanted to get out of Germany more than he wanted to wait till after the white paper, and so that was an issue, obviously, in those days. And we had a couple of cousins, uncles here in the States that sponsored him. And so we took the first ship out, okay? Or else I would have been an Israeli as well. And my heart is there, as the saying goes. And I hope that together, between the Israel and the United States and the Jews in the United States who are helping, we will continue to see a strong, vibrant, and growing Israel.
Reuben Margules, president of ZOA's Brooklyn region, thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Yoni. Thank you for having me.